In June, amid the golden fields, I saw a groundhog, lying dead. Dead lay he, my senses shook, and mine outshot our naked frailty. There lowly in the vigorous summer, his form began its senseless change, and made my senses waver dim. Seeing nature ferocious in him, inspecting close his maggot's might, and seething cauldron of his being, half with loathing, half with a strange love, I poked him with an angry stick. The fever arose, became a flame, and vigor circumscribed the skies, immense energy in the sun, and through my frame a sunless trembling. My stick had done no good nor harm. Then stood I silent, in the day, watching the object as before, and kept my reverence for knowledge, trying for control to be still, to quell the passion of the blood, until I bent down on my knees, praying for joy in the sight of decay. And so I left, and I returned in autumn, strict of eye, to see the sap gone out of the groundhog, but the bony, sodden hulk remained. But the year had lost its meaning, and in intellectual chains I lost both love and loathing. Mirrored up in the wall of wisdom, another summer took the fields again, massive and burning, full of life. But when I chanced upon the spot, there was only a little hair left, and bones bleaching in the sunlight. Beautiful as architecture, I watched them like a geometer, and cut a walking stick from a birch. It has been 3 years now. There is no sign of the groundhog. I stood there in the whirling summer, my hand capped a withered heart, and thought of China and of Greece, of Alexander in his tent, of Montaigne in his tower, of Saint Theresa in her wild lament.
Today I will be analyzing The Groundhog by Richard Eberhardt using the soapstone method. So as you can note from the blue, the speaker is the person that sees the groundhog lying dead, as noted by all the eyes in blue. The speaker does all the action in the poem. So the speaker is not an omniscient narrator. It is the person that witnesses the groundhog. The occasion of the poem is that a hiker, relatively scholarly hiker based on his language, comes across a groundhog. And this helps him understand decay, which is the purpose of the story. The purpose of the story is that all things decay, including the speaker. Now, how do I gather that purpose? Well, the main way I've gathered that purpose is from the tone. The tone is marked in orange, and the tone changes as you go throughout the poem. The first section of the poem, marked here with the 1, compared to 2, 3, and 4, I've kind of broken them up here, although I don't know if that's how the poet intended it to be. In the first poem, the tone is extremely full of energy and emotion and all this kind of stuff. So you have strained love and seething cauldron and maggot's might, immense energy, vigor to quell the passion of the blood. All this is representing that beginning sense of life, that he has not decayed yet. He is living life to his fullest. By the time you get to the second stanza, the tone includes sodden hulk and murred up in the wall of wisdom. And this is kind of showing his maturity possibly, and he's kind of getting out of his emotion as he begins to decay. In the third stanza, it's even more scholarly, such as he describes it as beautiful as architecture, which in my opinion is kind of a weird thing to be beautiful, or watch them like a geometer, which is even more unusual. By the fourth stanza, well, he's in extreme decay at this point. It's been 3 years now. He stood there in the whirling summer, and most importantly, his hand capped a withered heart. So the tone helps achieve his purpose to show that all things decay. Now, there's a couple devices I want to point out. The first one is repetition. In the first section of the poem, he references an angry stick. He poked him with an angry stick. And this is showing his high level of emotion at the beginning of the poem. However, by the third stanza, near the very end, he cut a walking stick. And this is showing his maturity, but also his decay from all this emotion. The third one I'll note is the use of seasons. The first one is set in June, which makes a lot of sense for a lot of emotion. June is a very, adventurous season. Foster tells us this, that summer has birth and life and growth and all this kind of stuff. In the second poem, in the second stanza, or the second section, excuse me, you have autumn. And autumn has fall and all the trees die and there's some sense of decay. So by the second stanza, you have started to decay. However, I will note that the third and the fourth section continue to use summer. He continues to revisit the summer. So even though he's continued to decay, he's not necessarily lost everything. Now, the main device of the poem to show this sense of decay is the last four stanzas. And I thought of China and Greece, of Alexander in his tent, of Montaigne in his tower, of St. Teresa in her wild lament. So I looked this up. I didn't really know exactly what he was referring to or who Montaigne or St. Teresa was. But I knew who Alexander the Great was. And when I think of Alexander the Great in this first section of the poem, I think of him conquering, right? And doing all this crazy stuff to win glory. And that's kind of like the first section, right? To quell the passion of blood, this vigor, this immense energy in the sun. Montaigne is a Enlightenment thinker, and he kind of withers away in one of his towers, even though he's very intellectual and extremely smart, similarly to the speaker in the poem. By the third one, of St. Teresa in her wild lament, this is kind of showing he is truly decaying at this point. Obviously, you have wild lament, and St. Teresa kind of slowly faded in her death. Now, all of that's well and dandy. Those are kind of soap-stowed in it. However, there's an obvious symbol that I have not talked about yet, and that is the groundhog. The groundhog is the main way that we see decay in the poem. Obviously, the groundhog itself decays, right? So in the first stanza, he is kind of dead, but he is dead, but he's still kind of there, right? His stick hadn't done harm or good, but he's still there. By the second poem, he's just kind of bones. Not by the second poem, excuse me. By the second section, he's just kind of bones. And by the third section, there's only hair left, and the bones are almost gone. And by the fourth section, there is no sign of the groundhog. This is clearly the most obvious way that he is showing decay. So the purpose of the poem is to show this decay, that all things are decaying, including the speaker himself. And he does this through the use of seasons, through the use of repetition and the angry stick and the walking stick, through the verbs and language between the beginning of the poem and the end of the poem, and by the device at the end of referencing history. However, the main way that this is done is by the use of the groundhog.